Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. Hopefully everybody is doing great. I am myself. So before we get into it though, before we get into the juicy stuff, please like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out, helps out the algorithm of the channel, especially if you enjoy non-biased election content. Delivers you the facts and nothing but the facts. Alright, let's get into it. Are Republicans possibly giving away a winnable Senate race, which they should be able to win in Texas? So that is the topic of the video. Let's get right into it. All right, are Republicans at risk of losing Texas? And I say that because it's kind of interesting, right? Texas has kind of once again flown under the radar of competitive races throughout the United States for the U.S. Senate specifically. Governor's race, not as much. You have Greg Abbott running for re-election, but the Senate race has really, especially recently, became very interesting. So after the primaries, Democrats have James Talarico, and Republicans learned who their nominee is, which we'll get to him in a minute. Attorney General Ken Paxton, who's obviously the Republican. So, and then Talarico the Democrat, Paxton the Republican. So, the basics of that race. Now let's get into why do I think this race is really one to watch. And that's because of, if you haven't been paying attention to politics, but Texas has really been interesting in its swing from being a really deeply red state to a more of a lighter red state, even more competitive at times. You saw in 2018 it became very competitive. Republicans still won, but he had a lot of close races. We'll get to that in a minute as well. Some close races in 2018. 2020, not quite as light red as it was in 2018, but it was a little bit redder. Still competitive, nonetheless, in 2020 compared to how it would have been 10 years even earlier. And then you saw it shift rapidly back to the right back in 2024. Which kind of is interesting because it went from a really red state to more purple to deep red again. Now, a lot of that is due to Latinos, right? If you look at the 2024 presidential election, you saw Donald Trump do very well here. He obviously won some key counties. He won Tarrant County. He performed well in exurban counties. He put up a strong fight in Fort Bend County. Harris did reasonably well there, but she still won it, but Trump made it close. He won Williamson County, and then did pretty well in the rural areas. Some competitive-ish areas over here. He ran up the margins there. But the really key part of this was South Texas, right? South Texas in 2018 for the Senate race with Beto O'Rourke and Republican Ted Cruz. So this was thought of to be a poor performance by the Democrats at the time. Now, if you look at it now, this is very good performance for the Democrats. But you saw a lot of South Texas was very Democrat voting because they have a very high Latino population. It's been debated, are they going to swing back to the Democrats this year like they swung hard to the Republicans in 2024? Is it going to be a mix? That's debated upon between a lot of people. I think it's going to be a mix. I think you're going to see some reversion. I don't think the 2026 margins are going to be as blue as 2018, but I don't think they're certainly not going to be as red as they were in 2024. Because some especially the reason why Donald Trump won Texas by the margin that he did was he locked up a lot of the Rio Grande Valley, which was reliably Democratic and went pretty strongly Republican in this election. Saw Stark County go for Donald Trump by 57% of the vote. He also won Webb County. And he held Zapata County. But a really big deal was him winning Webb County and making some of these other bluer counties, like Dimmitt County, closer. He still lost his vote by a little bit. But these are low population counties, but they really say a lot of how the broader electorate has shifted and can shift just in one election. And that's really what the point is, right? If Texas is going to be as close as it's shaping up to me, you're really going to see a mixed results in South Texas. So this is my map, actually, I have of Texas on how I think that as of now it's going to work. As of now, I think Republicans are favored by around 3 or 4 points in Texas. It would have been a likely margin with John Cornyn, but now it's only going to be a lean margin with Ken Paxton. I definitely think it can get even closer than 4 points. I think it's gonna get even closer as it goes on, but I think if the election were held today, it'd probably be around 4-point win for Paxton. Right, I think a lot of the South Texas has a lot of say in it, as well as the suburban counties as well, and then obviously the rural counties, margin-wise, plays a big role in it. But since I already told you the margin, let's get into how it's going to pan out, in my opinion, and who both candidates are. Do I think they're good candidates or bad candidates? We'll get into that. But let's talk about Ken Paxton's electoral history. Now, a lot of people say he's a very weak candidate. I would tend to agree. I think he's really not the strongest candidate Republicans could have ran. I think this race would have been a lot less of a worry for the Republicans if they put up John Cornyn, but he lost the primary to Trump-endorsed Attorney General Ken Paxton. He's tall enough to be a weak candidate. I do agree. I think he's a pretty weak candidate. He does have some skeletons in his closet. He does have some scandals. However, they were a few years ago. And a lot of times, scandals, people usually move on. And I don't think everybody moved on. I think people are going to, hopefully, as they should, about any candidate running, even Tallarico, right? You always do your research on what each candidate is, their backgrounds and whatnot. So I think Paxton's scandals in some certain areas could affect the race, the outcome. But you saw in 2022, he won by 9.5 points, just shy of 10. But it was likely margin. In 2022, he underperformed Governor Greg Abbott's election by around a point, which he won by 10. So he underperformed every Republican in 2022. And 2018 wasn't really the best year either, because you saw Ted Cruz win by around 2 points. You saw Ken Paxton win by around 3. So not much better than Ted Cruz. His election, again, not super great. Ironically, he did win Tarrant County, but I think that area is shifting blue, despite Trump winning there by a decent margin. I think, besides that, he didn't do too great statewide compared to how a Republican should win. He only won by under 4%, which is pretty low for Republicans in Texas. Pretty much, it kind of reminds me of New York in 2022. You saw Lee Zeldin make New York, a deep blue state, pretty competitive for the Republicans. Even though he wasn't going to win, right? He was a strong candidate, and he was able to get some crossover votes. It's kind of how Beto O'Rourke was in 2018 with the Senate race here. Now, do I think that James Tallarico could win? In a best-case scenario, I would say narrowly. I still am giving it to Ken Paxton just because Texas hasn't voted Democrat in a very long time. I definitely keeping an open mind to it. I think it's very possible that this race becomes very close. It's going to be very expensive. A lot of money is going to be put in from both sides, right? It's going to be very interesting to see how this race goes. But in my opinion, the Republicans are definitely risking this Senate seat with putting up a less strong general election candidate in Ken Paxton. I think he's going to make this race a lot closer than it should be. Something to note, though, is that he did win by a lot in his first term. In 2014, you saw Ken Paxton win by a lot, but I think that was a different time for Texas. I think it's probably not going to win by that margin. I think it's probably going to be, again, a 4-point win. I definitely think this race, again, going to be a lot closer than it was in 2024. It's hard to say if it's going to be as blue as it was in 2018. Very well could be, especially if there's funding, right? I don't think Tallarico is especially the best, because talk about how Paxton isn't the strongest candidate for the Republicans. I'll say for the Democrats, Tallarico's not a bad candidate, but he's also not great either, right? He's kind of he hasn't had a prominent position. He was a state representative, so I'll give him that. But I don't think he's a super strong candidate, right? Doesn't have super big name recognition. He'll raise a lot of money, but I think that just because Texas is still predominantly a red state, I don't think he's like per se moderate enough to get enough crossover votes to be able to win Texas. I just don't see it. I don't see him winning outright. Again, best case scenario for the Democrats, they could win Texas, but and even in the best case Republican scenario, Paxton could win by 8. But to balance everything out, I think it's going to be an R+3 or 4 win in Texas. Democrats would have to win the popular vote by like 13 points or 12 points to be able to win Texas, which is possible. But again, just because of the track record of the state, I think that Paxton is still favored. I think it's going to be around D+5 or 6 environment, as I see it, according to polls and whatnot. Again, it's always good to balance out each thing. There are some interesting counties though to watch. Obviously, as I pointed out, South Texas is important, but you also have key counties, right? A lot of suburban purple voters, right? They vote differently each time. We'll take a look at Williamson County, for example. Trump won this by 3. Beto O'Rourke won it by 2. So if Tallarico wants to make this a really competitive race, he would have to win this probably by around 4 or 5 points, which possible. We'll see how trends are, and Latino reversion could revert back to 2018 margins, or it could stay similar to 2024. Again, I think it's going to be in the middle. I still think Latino voters are going to shift leftward, though. I think you definitely have 3 really competitive congressional races in this part of the state that will really be determined on reversion. Like Hidalgo County is the place to watch. But we're going back to Williamson, right? O'Rourke won it by 2. Trump won it by 3. This is a very competitive county to watch. Keep an eye on Williamson County. And then, as I mentioned briefly earlier, Tarrant County is important. You saw Trump win it by 6, and you saw Beto O'Rourke win it by really the skin of his teeth. It was very, very close, by 0.7%. I think Tallarico will probably win Tarrant County this year. It's possible Paxton does, but I think Tallarico will win Tarrant County. Now, by the margin, it's hard to say. He could win it by a few points, especially if he wants to make this a close race. If Paxton ends up overperforming expectations in polls, he could have a margin similar, in between, more similar to the 2024 Senate election, where more of an 8-point win for the Republicans. Those 2 are the counties I would definitely take a look at as far as suburban purple counties. Another one that's more important is Jefferson County. That's another important place to watch. Again, that narrowly voted Democratic for O'Rourke, and in 2018, Ken Paxton lost Jefferson County. Trump, though, in 2024 won here by 9 points. I think it's going to be around a 1 to 2 point win for Republicans in Jefferson County. It's an important say in the margins of the state, the Lone Star State of Texas. So, pretty much I think this covers it all. Appreciate you watching. Let me know down in the comments what you think about this Senate election in Texas. Do you think Tallarico is going to win? Do you think Paxton is going to win? Do you think this race will get close? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. I always like hearing from you. And again, we'll see you in the next video. Bye.